She was never supposed to make it. Not by Hollywood's math. The industry had a rule book back then, one that measured beauty in millimeters and talent by pedigree, and Julia Roberts broke nearly every line of it. Too tall. Too wide a mouth. Too much personality for a face that wasn't supposed to carry it. And somehow, she became the most beloved actress on the planet anyway. Not handed the role, but earned it, through poverty, heartbreak, a shattered family, and a fame so sudden it nearly swallowed her before she learned how to hold it. For 30 years, she made the world laugh, cry, and believe in things that had no business feeling believable. That smile, wide, unguarded, somehow too big for the screen and exactly right for it, became one of the most recognized images in film history. But behind it sits a story the cameras rarely got close to. A girl from a small Georgia town who watched her world fall apart, who landed in Hollywood with next to nothing, and who built an empire out of sheer refusal to quit, then nearly lost herself trying to hold on to it. Julia Fiona Roberts was born October 28, 1967, in Atlanta. But it was Smyrna, a working-class suburb where ambition wasn't really on the menu, that actually raised her. On the surface, her household buzzed with creative energy. Her parents, Walter and Betty Lou, ran a small acting workshop for local kids out of their home. Underneath that, the foundation was already splitting. Her parents' marriage wasn't quiet, it was loud, full of arguments that bled through the walls at night. Walter Roberts was a genuine talent, a playwright with real artistic fire, but passion doesn't always make for stability, and this household didn't get much of either. Julia was 4 when her parents divorced. A private earthquake that nobody outside the house could hear. What followed was the slow grind of a fractured family. Her mother remarried a man named Michael Motes, and the household that resulted ran on love but not much stability. There were stretches when the family relied on food stamps just to get by. Then, when Julia was 9, the real blow landed. Her father died of cancer at just 42. For a 9-year-old already learning to navigate instability, it wasn't just a loss. It was the collapse of the one steady thing she had. Walter had been the person who told her that stories mattered, that performance had power. His death didn't just take a parent. It took the blueprint she'd been quietly building her future on. She carried that loss for decades. Even years later, fully famous, the mention of her father would noticeably soften her voice in a way no red carpet question usually managed. He never saw a single frame of what she became. An absence that sat, permanently, in every empty seat at every premiere of her career. School gave her some breathing room. She was bright, magnetic, the kind of kid whose laugh filled a room long before anyone guessed it would one day be worth a fortune. But she was also restless, carrying the particular hunger of someone who'd already learned the world can vanish. She landed in New York City in 1986 at 18 years old, with a suitcase, no contacts, and the kind of fearless momentum only the young or the desperate can summon. She slept on her older sister Lisa's apartment floor in a city that has never once been gentle with anyone's ambitions. The rejections came fast and constant. She auditioned, got passed over. Auditioned again, got passed over again. Casting directors called her unconventional, too angular, not quite right, over and over, in slightly different language. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse, routine. She picked up modeling work to cover rent, just enough money to survive, never quite enough to relax. Going home wasn't an option her pride would allow. New York had to work, because there was no backup plan. Slowly, things started to shift. Small roles. Student films. The unglamorous groundwork that builds an actor's instincts long before anyone notices. Her brother Eric, already a few steps ahead in Hollywood, opened a couple of doors for her, but she wasn't coasting on his name. She was building her own footing, rejection by rejection. In 1988, she landed a supporting role in Mystic Pizza, a small film about 3 young women working in a Connecticut pizza shop. It wasn't built to launch anyone. It didn't need to be. Julia Roberts on screen, even in a secondary role, was simply impossible to look away from. Industry attention started building, quietly. She'd survived New York. What came next would move faster than anyone, including her, was ready for. Some films can't be explained by talent alone. The timing, the face, the cultural hunger all align at once, and the result isn't just a hit, it's a rupture. Pretty Woman was that rupture. Released in March 1990, the script had originally been darker and edgier before the studio polished it into a glossy fairy tale, and at its center stood a 22-year-old who'd been sleeping on her sister's floor 4 years earlier. The film grossed $463 million worldwide, the highest-grossing romantic comedy of its era, and Julia Roberts went from relatively unknown to globally famous in the space of a single weekend. That smile did most of the heavy lifting. Too wide, too bright, impossibly real, nothing like the manufactured glow most studio products tried to fake. People could tell the difference instantly. She earned an Academy Award nomination. Her face went up on magazine covers, billboards, and front pages in languages she couldn't read. What nobody warned her about was the weight that comes attached to that kind of overnight fame. Every move photographed. Every relationship picked apart. Every flaw catalogued for public consumption. The girl who'd grown up learning that the things you love can disappear without warning now found herself inside a fame so enormous it generated its own weather. Friendships got complicated. Trust became something you had to calculate. She was 22 years old, holding up an empire nobody had trained her to carry. At that scale, fame doesn't just complicate relationships, it moves in and sits at the table. Julia learned that lesson at 22, in full public view. Her 1990 engagement to Kiefer Sutherland looked, from the outside, like the fairy tale continuing, two young stars, glamorous, golden, building a life together in the spotlight. A wedding date was set for June 14, 1991. 3 days before the ceremony, she called it off. The tabloids tore into her, reckless, cold, unstable, a runaway bride years before that phrase became one of her movie titles. What none of the headlines captured was the simple truth: she was 23, trying to make an impossible personal decision under an impossible amount of scrutiny, with none of the privacy any person deserves when their heart is involved. She pulled back from the spotlight, took smaller, quieter roles. The world read it as a collapse. It was actually self-preservation. In 1993, she married singer Lyle Lovett, a relationship that surprised almost everyone, private and unconventional in a way that felt genuinely real rather than performed. It lasted about 2 years, and when it ended quietly, without a villain or a media circus assigned to it. What those years taught her wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. She started to understand the specific tax fame charges on intimacy, how hard it becomes to know whether someone sees you, the actual person, or just the image, the icon, the $463 million smile projected onto every screen on Earth. She'd been loved by millions and was only beginning to grasp that being wanted by everyone isn't remotely the same as being known by anyone. Returning takes a different kind of nerve than starting out. By the late 1990s, Julia Roberts came back to the center of Hollywood with precision instead of desperation, choosing carefully rather than chasing momentum. The role that defined her next chapter wasn't another romantic fantasy, it was a real, furious, unglamorous woman named Erin Brockovich. Released in 2000, the film told the true story of an untrained single mother who took on a massive corporation and won, a story about someone the system had written off, who refused to disappear. Whether or not Julia ever pointed to the parallels with her own life, the performance spoke for itself. She stripped the glamour out completely: wardrobe, hair, attitude, all deliberately rougher than anything audiences had seen from her. It won her the Academy Award for Best Actress and made her the first actress in history to command a $20 million paycheck for a single film, earned not by repeating what already worked, but by tearing it down and starting over. The run that followed cemented her as a genuine power player. Ocean's 11 in 2001 put her alongside Hollywood's biggest names in a film built on pure chemistry, while Closer in 2004 revealed a darker, more complicated register that silenced anyone still writing her off as merely charming. She refused to be boxed in, refused to become a brand instead of a person. While her career was rebuilding, something quieter was shifting underneath it. In 2000, on the set of The Mexican, she met cameraman Daniel Moder, not a star, not part of the industry's image machine, just a genuinely uncomplicated presence. After years of distorted relationships filtered through fame, she recognized something rare in that simplicity, the possibility of actually being known. At the absolute height of her career, $20 million per film, an Oscar on the shelf, top billing on everything that mattered, she made the most subversive choice available to her. She chose to step back into an ordinary life. The relationship had a complicated start. Moder was married when they met, and the tabloids feasted on it accordingly. But what grew from it was a genuine partnership built far from the cameras. They married in July 2002 at her ranch in Taos, New Mexico. No red carpet, no press inside, just a deliberate, private decision to protect something real. The years that followed were measured in family milestones rather than box office numbers. Twins Hazel and Phineas arrived in November 2004, a third child, Henry, followed in June 2007. With each one, Julia moved further from the celebrity machine and closer to the stable home she'd never had growing up. She relocated her life to that New Mexico ranch, drove her kids to school, cooked dinner, lived, as much as someone of her fame could, an ordinary daily life. Hollywood watched, mostly baffled. Stars at her level usually can't afford to step back, professionally or psychologically. She let her own visibility fade, on purpose, and took roles only when they genuinely interested her. The girl who once needed to escape Smyrna had finally found somewhere she wanted to stay. There's a myth that wealth and fame build a wall thick enough to keep ordinary grief out. Julia Roberts has spent a lifetime quietly disproving it, away from the cameras. Her relationship with her half-sister, Nancy Motes, who performed under the name Nancy Mott and lived for years in the shadow of Julia's fame, was one of the more public wounds. Nancy spoke openly about feeling overlooked and left behind, her own career and identity dimmed by the size of her sister's. Julia, as she nearly always did, didn't respond publicly. In February 2014, Nancy was found dead in Los Angeles at age 37, in what officials described as an apparent drug overdose. A note she left reportedly referenced the estrangement between them. The grief that followed was tangled, not clean, not simple, shadowed by guilt and questions with no real answers. When Julia eventually spoke about it, months later, it came out in careful, painful fragments. Those close to her described someone carrying the loss privately, the same way she carried everything that mattered. She made the most subversive choice available to her. She chose to step back into an ordinary life. The relationship had a complicated start. Moder was married when they met, and the tabloids feasted on it accordingly. But what grew from it was a genuine partnership built far from the cameras. They married in July 2002 at her ranch in Taos, New Mexico. No red carpet, no press inside, just a deliberate, private decision to protect something real. The years that followed were measured in family milestones rather than box office numbers. Twins Hazel and Phineas arrived in November 2004, a third child, Henry, followed in June 2007. With each one, Julia moved further from the celebrity machine and closer to the stable home she'd never had growing up. She relocated her life to that New Mexico ranch, drove her kids to school, cooked dinner, lived, as much as someone of her fame could, an ordinary daily life. Hollywood watched, mostly baffled. Stars at her level usually can't afford to step back, professionally or psychologically. She let her own visibility fade, on purpose, and took roles only when they genuinely interested her. The girl who once needed to escape Smyrna had finally found somewhere she wanted to stay. There's a myth that wealth and fame build a wall thick enough to keep ordinary grief out. Julia Roberts has spent a lifetime quietly disproving it, away from the cameras. Her relationship with her half-sister, Nancy Motes, who performed under the name Nancy Mott and lived for years in the shadow of Julia's fame, was one of the more public wounds. Nancy spoke openly about feeling overlooked and left behind, her own career and identity dimmed by the size of her sister's. Julia, as she nearly always did, didn't respond publicly. In February 2014, Nancy was found dead in Los Angeles at age 37, in what officials described as an apparent drug overdose. A note she left reportedly referenced the estrangement between them. The grief that followed was tangled, not clean, not simple, shadowed by guilt and questions with no real answers. When Julia eventually spoke about it, months later, it came out in careful, painful fragments. Those close to her described someone carrying the loss privately, the same way she carried everything that mattered most. Her mother, Betty Lou, weathered her own version of hardship across those same years. A difficult second marriage, years of financial strain, the complicated legacy of raising children whose lives went in such wildly different directions. Fame had given Julia Roberts almost everything the world uses to measure success. It hadn't given her a sister who was still alive, or a father who lived long enough to see what she became. In 2025, Julia Roberts is 57, and by any measure that actually matters, she's exactly who she set out to be. She still works selectively, with the quiet confidence of someone who has nothing left to prove. Her role in 2023's Leave the World Behind reminded a new generation what longtime fans already knew: whatever it is she brings to the screen, it doesn't fade with time. It deepens. But the work isn't the center anymore. The center is her marriage, more than 2 decades with Daniel Moder, in an industry where 2 years is treated as a milestone, a partnership that's absorbed competing careers, constant scrutiny, and the demands of raising 3 kids in the shadow of major fame, and simply held. The center is Hazel and Phineas, now in their early 20s, and Henry, approaching adulthood, 3 kids she raised with the deliberate intention of being known as themselves, not as Julia Roberts's children. Having grown up in a fractured, unstable home, she made sure hers would be the opposite: steady, present, a parent who actually showed up. Her fortune, estimated north of $250 million, sits on her with the same detachment she's always shown toward the trophies of success. The Taos Ranch remains the real headquarters of her life: land, distance, a piece of the world that belongs to the life she built rather than the career that funded it. She's talked more openly in recent years about aging, not with anxiety but with something closer to peace, and the industry watches, faintly puzzled, as she simply refuses to perform the expected panic. She looks like herself, and she's chosen to keep looking like herself. In Hollywood, that's basically a statement of principle. There's a moment in Pretty Woman people remember without quite being able to explain why: not the most dramatic scene, not the most technically impressive, just the moment she laughs, fully and unexpectedly, and the whole film stops feeling like a product and starts feeling real. That moment has held up for 35 years because it couldn't have been manufactured. It came from someone who'd known real loss, real hunger, real uncertainty, and who came out the other side still capable of that kind of unguarded joy. That's the actual legacy. Not the Oscar, not the $20 million paycheck, not the magazine covers. Those are just the units the industry uses because it has nothing more precise. What actually matters: a girl from a broken home in a small Georgia town decided, against plenty of evidence to the contrary, to keep going. She was rejected, heartbroken, publicly humiliated, privately devastated, and she kept going anyway. She built a career on her own terms, a family on her own terms, a life on her own terms. And in doing that, she left the world something more durable than any single performance: proof. Proof that being too much for some rooms is exactly what makes you unforgettable in others. Proof that the most famous smile in Hollywood history wasn't built on perfection, it was built on survival.